The night was heavy with silence. The wind howled through the ruins of an old farmhouse on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. Captain James Carter adjusted his rifle strap as he scanned the distant hills. The war had left scars on the land and on the people who fought to defend it. It had started with whispers, rumors of a second civil war brewing within the heart of the United States. Political divisions had turned into armed conflicts, and soon, the once united nation found itself split into factions. Cities burned, and millions were displaced as the battle lines formed. Captain Carter, a veteran of foreign wars, never thought he would fight on American soil. The resistance had taken hold in the eastern states, defending what remained of the Union. The rebels, fueled by a vision of a fractured America, had fortified their strongholds in the Midwest. The government had declared martial law, and every able-bodied soldier was called upon to serve. James had been stationed at a critical outpost just outside the capital, tasked with defending against an imminent attack. "Sir, we spotted movement along the ridge," Private Dawson whispered, his breath visible in the cold night air. James turned his gaze toward the hill. The moon cast an eerie glow over the landscape, illuminating figures creeping through the trees. The enemy was close. He clenched his fists and signaled his men to take their positions. The radio crackled. "All units, prepare for engagement. We have confirmed hostiles approaching from the west." James inhaled sharply. This was it. Gunfire erupted in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of explosions. The enemy had begun their assault. The ground trembled as mortar shells rained down on their position, sending dirt and debris flying. James ducked behind a makeshift barricade and shouted orders to his men. "Hold the line. We cannot let them breach the perimeter." The battle raged for hours. Smoke filled the air, and the screams of the wounded echoed in the darkness. James fought relentlessly, his rifle never still. The rebels were ruthless, their attacks swift and coordinated. For every man they lost, more seemed to emerge from the shadows. Then came the worst sound of all, the unmistakable roar of incoming artillery. James barely had time to react before a deafening explosion sent him flying backward. His vision blurred, and pain shot through his leg. He groaned, forcing himself to move despite the agony. The outpost was in ruins. Fires raged around him, casting an orange glow on the blood-soaked ground. "Sir." "Captain Carter." A familiar voice broke through the chaos. James turned to see Dawson rushing toward him, his uniform stained with dirt and blood. "We're being overrun. We need to fall back." James clenched his jaw. Retreat meant losing the capital. Losing the capital meant losing the war. But staying meant death. Gritting his teeth, he reached for his radio. "Command, this is Captain Carter. We are sustaining heavy losses. Requesting immediate air support." Static. Then a voice. "Negative, Captain. All units are engaged. You need to hold." James closed his eyes briefly. No reinforcements. No backup. Only survival. He turned to his remaining men. "We make our stand here." The soldiers around him nodded, their faces hardened with resolve. They had come too far to abandon their fight. They would not let their country fall. As dawn broke over the battlefield, James rose to his feet, pain forgotten. The rebels were closing in, but so was the will of those who refused to surrender. And so, the last stand began. Hours passed, and the battlefield became an unrecognizable wasteland. The sun climbed higher, its golden rays illuminating the destruction. Smoke and dust hung thick in the air. Bodies lay scattered across the field, friends and foes alike. James wiped the sweat and blood from his brow, his rifle now empty. The rebels had pulled back for the moment, likely regrouping for another assault. He knew they were outnumbered, but there was no room for despair. Dawson crouched beside him, panting heavily. "We can't keep this up forever, sir." James nodded grimly. "I know." The radio crackled again, this time with a different message. "Captain Carter, reinforcements inbound. Hold your position." Relief surged through him. They weren't alone after all. Minutes later, the distant roar of engines echoed through the valley. Fighter jets streaked across the sky, unleashing a barrage of missiles upon the enemy's stronghold. A convoy of armored vehicles rolled over the hills, sending the remaining rebels into a panicked retreat. James exhaled sharply. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. As he surveyed the destruction, a bitter truth settled over him. This was only the beginning. The nation was fractured, and healing would take more than victories on the battlefield. It would take unity, something that seemed more distant than ever. James squared his shoulders. He had survived another battle, but his fight was far from finished. With one last look at the field of war, he turned to his men. "We move forward," and with that, they marched into the unknown, carrying the weight of a nation on their shoulders.